To understand the weaknesses of the European Monetary Union, we must analyze the events that exposed them since the beginning of the crisis, in 2007. What seemed to be a crisis of the United States banking system exclusively ended up by hitting the European economy at an even larger scale. The European banks were exposed to United States securities, and when the crisis began in the United States, uncertainty rose in Europe. In the European Union system, it is the national banks that had to rescue their own private banks, and when private banks began to ask for support, governments became more and more indebted. By that time, competitiveness inequalities had rose from years of low interest rates, which had been used to boost aggregate growth. But aggregate growth accounted for a diverse set of countries, and the decision to lower interest rates had different effects among the member states. The northern countries, which had indeed low inflation, benefited from these policies. But in the peripheral countries, low interest rates boosted growth more vividly, creating bubbles, mainly the real estate sector. In the meantime, this artificial growth gave them no incentive whatsoever to follow the recommendations for structural reforms coming from the European Union's institutions. So when the European banks started to need rescues, the countries that were considered to be southern, such as Spain, Greece, Portugal, or Italy, became too indebted. Ireland joined them due to their policy of covering their banks to 100%, which turned their debt from one of the lowest in the Eurozone in 2007, 23% of its GDP, to 100% of the GDP in the year 2011. But the main shock was in 2009, when the newly elected Greek government of George Papandreou announced that the Greek debt had been seriously understated. Investors got extremely worried, and the Greek bonds rose immensely due to this speculation. The European Union did nothing at the beginning, considering Greece a country too small to matter. But an insecurity effect spread into the rest of the southern countries, which were struggling to reduce their deficit. From an investor point of view, if there is no bailout option for the European Central Bank and the national governments are insolvent, who will rescue the banks? By the same token, who will rescue those countries? Furthermore, will the euro collapse? The years that followed were intense. The northern countries were reluctant to aid those in the south, distrusting their commitment to undertake structural reforms. The European Central Bank couldn't act as a lender of last resource due to a no bailout rule. Uncertainty was high, as the economy of the countries in the south faced a potential collapse. It was soon clear that, unless all of the members collaborated, the euro couldn't survive.
The northern countries were reluctant to aid economically those in the south, like in the case of Greece. In addition, the European Central Bank had a non-bailout rule, so they couldn't aid those countries. So we decided to create small funds in order to buy bonds in the secondary market in order to stabilize the situation.
So what we've learned in Keynesian economics is that in the long run, GDP grows at a constant rate of around 3%, which would be the straight line. But in the short run, the GDP curve has its ups and downs depending on the animal spirits of the people, of the aggregate demand, which can be positive or negative. So what Keynes wants to do is to reduce the volatility of this curve to achieve more stability. So the Keynesian strategy is that when there is a shock, like here, the government expenditure must rise in order to counter-effect the diminishing aggregate demand. This way the economy will shift back up. Now, our addition to Keynesian economics is that when the economy is high, government expenditure should be reduced in order to save for bad times. So the years after the euro was formed were years of positive economic growth. Nevertheless, the Greek policy was to increase government expenditure even if having economic growth. So when the shock arrived in the year 2008-2009, they couldn't spend any more because they would run for insolvency. So their policy had to be of austerity. Meanwhile, Germany had a quite stable government expenditure, and when the shock arrived, they could spend more to counter the effect of the shock. This graph comparing the evolution of the GDPs is a clear sign that the German policy of spending during the crisis had its effect, and in fact it came back to growth. Whereas the Greek policy of austerity measures, because they weren't solvent enough to keep on spending, had the totally opposite effect, and it kept falling and falling.
Creating a stronger European Union to enforce structural reforms needed during periods of growth, then a banking union for the European Central Bank to be able to rescue countries during declining periods. Thirdly, a fiscal union to ensure that countries do not overspend and they have a cushion to counter shocks. Finally, a stronger political union to legitimize all of the above, the economic, fiscal, and political unions.